So, welcome again, everyone. Everyone who's here in person, folks who are online. So wonderful to have the Sangha gathered together. I always enjoy seeing your faces. This is the Sunday Sound of Dhamma. And as usual, we'll have about a 10 or 15-minute guided meditation. And then I'll offer the Dhamma talk. And there will be time for Q&A at the end. And before we begin the meditation, just to say that next Sunday we will be having a precept ceremony, a traditional Zen ceremony of taking ethical vows at this same time. So if everyone's welcome to attend and see Jesse and Todd take their vows, and if that's not of interest to you, then we'll be back to the regular Sunday Sounds program the following weekend. And yeah, what else? We have a brunch here at the Vihara on December 8th, which is celebrating the Buddha's Enlightenment Day. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that today, actually, the Buddha's awakening and his teachings right after that point. But then also to say that Spanish Dharma class is beginning on Monday nights, 4 weeks, through San Francisco Zen Center, and art workshops. So we'll do the first art workshop will be the virtual tour of the British Museum Buddhist collection on December 15th. And I will, and that's in the evening. Sorry for folks who are in a different time zone, in faraway European time zones. But I will try to see if we can get some interpretation for that, so that it will be recorded in both English and in Spanish. So y'all can see the recordings if you can't make it. And on that note, I think we'll go ahead and begin the meditation today. So I'm just going to offer a meditation on mindfulness of breathing, but with a particular emphasis on how to attend to the breath without grasping, how to really put the attention on the object without grasping it. So you can go ahead and begin to settle into your meditation posture. I'd like to begin with a bit of movement. Hi, welcome. Allowing the body to find that balanced and upright position. So that the bones can carry the weight of the body. And perhaps the muscles can soften and widen. And please mute your mics if you haven't already done that. Relaxing the belly. And really allowing the body to settle in this place, in this time. Perhaps also feeling the weight of the legs and the feet. The natural stability of the body. And perhaps by now, the sensations of the breath are starting to come into awareness. And you can rest your attention on those sensations of the breath. Just like resting your gaze on someone you appreciate. Just gently observing. Just feeling those sensations of the breath breathing the body. And gently observing the sensations as they arise and they cease. all sorts of other sensations and thoughts might be happening. But your attention is resting gently on the sensations of the breath. That soft inner gaze. Beautiful. So that was the meditation for this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, whatever part of the world you happen to be in. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Suddenly it occurs to me that maybe I will have a little handout for the for folks who want to chant along. We can share it on screen for folks online. So as I mentioned earlier, December 8th is the day of the year that the Japanese Zen Buddhist tradition is chosen to celebrate the enlightenment of the historical person that we call the Buddha, Indian man, Nepali Indian man who lived about 2,500 years ago or so. And that means that and goodness knows, that was a long time ago. So we've chosen these times based on the texts that have come down to us, which were previously oral recitations for many centuries. But it means that this time of year is a time when perhaps he would have been sitting close to the Bodhi tree there just outside of Gaya, India, and enjoying the bliss of awakening. It said that after he woke up, it took him about 7 weeks of enjoying the bliss of awakening before he got up to go give his first sermon. And he was very clear that what he woke up to was not a sense of joy or a particular kind of meditation or a deity or nothingness. But what he woke up to was freedom from what we call dukkha, freedom from, you could say, the kind of deep unsatisfactoriness of life. So we're going to talk about that joyful topic of what is meant by dukkha and why on earth we decided to continue talking about that. All these many centuries later, what does it mean to you today? Because if it doesn't mean something to you today, then there's really no point in talking about it. So on that note, I want to talk about the historical Buddha's first discourse, his first sermon, so to speak, after his awakening, or so it's understood in what we call the Theravada tradition, the tradition of the way of the elders. Some of the earliest Buddhist teachings in these texts that were, well, it's hard to explain, but they would have been sort of codified around the turn of the beginning of the Common Era, so around the year 0, the year 1, plus or minus 100 or so years. We have to keep these things in mind. And this is true about us too. And that's an important point. Pardon me. That's an important point to remember. That forgetting is also true about us. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It actually has a function. It actually has a beneficial function on the path. So hopefully, let me swing around back to that later. For now, I just want to talk a little bit about the Buddha. There's a very interesting sutta. It's not this first discourse, actually. There's a very interesting sutta in which the Buddha speaks about different types of difficulty, mental difficulty, and how they are resolved. And he says there are certain kinds of mental difficulty that are resolved just by seeing them. And maybe you've experienced this, right? In a meditation or in your life, you suddenly become aware of some difficulty that you're having. And just by seeing it, you can say, oh, right, that's a thought. Or, you know, I've had this pain before and it went away. Or any number of ways that your relationship to that thing shifts just by being attentive to it. And one of the things that he said that one of the kinds of difficulty or suffering of a human life that he said we could eliminate just by seeing it was speculation. Like, who have I been in the past, or who will I be in the future, or how did this human existence come to be, and all of that. He said, don't bother. Don't bother. In fact, when people would ask him those questions, he would decline to answer. There were at least 10 or more questions that the Buddha was very well known for not answering. Because he said, it won't actually bring an end to your difficulty. Those kinds of speculative, philosophical questions, they can be very entertaining, but not in a good way necessarily, right? So it's a very clear pointer that anything that the teaching, any kind of teaching that comes out of Buddhism, it must ultimately be something that you can refer to in your own practice. Otherwise, you should set it down. Otherwise, you should just let it alone for a while. So rather than these speculative questions, he said, we should examine what are now known as the Four Noble Truths. And this is why I want to go back to that first discourse, because that was one of the very first teachings that he gave. After his awakening, he went back to the 5 ascetics, 5 spiritual seekers that had practiced meditation with him and various kinds of ascetic austerities with him prior to his awakening. They had, in fact, decided that he was a slacker. They had left him behind because they were practicing starvation. They were practicing not eating to the point of almost death. And the Buddha said, you know, this isn't going to actually help either. So when he made that choice, they decided that he wasn't strict enough, or, you know, he wasn't disciplined enough. But after his awakening, the Buddha realizes in his mind that he could go back and talk to them and sort of say, this is what I have discovered, and sort of help them to find a better way, a better path, which ultimately becomes known as the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism. So another lesson, many good lessons today, another lesson, right, as I spoke about last week, don't cut off the people, even the people who cut you off. That's not our way. That's not our way. So with great compassion, the Buddha goes back to the 5 ascetics. As the story goes, they're not even sure they really want to hang out with him. They're like, we're not even going to put a seat for him necessarily, or be respectful to him, even though he was kind of the leader of the group before this had happened, this break in the relationship had happened. But then they see him coming and they're like, okay, all right, we'll put a seat out for him and let him hang out with us. So unlike the mean girls, they gave the Buddha a seat, and to their benefit, right? Because ultimately, he starts to say, hey, you know, I have experienced enlightenment. I really want to tell you about how this happened. And they kind of slough it off. They're kind of like, you know, I don't know. We don't really have a lot of confidence in you. And he says, no, really, like I have experienced in full enlightenment, and I want to tell you about that, how that happened. And again, they kind of slough him off and decline. And he says, listen now, did I ever say before that I was fully enlightened? I'm telling you now that something has changed. And so they say, okay, please go ahead and tell us whatever it is you have to say, because it is, maybe something really has changed for you. And so he gives this teaching now known as the first turning of the wheel of Dhamma, first turning of the wheel. And in that teaching, he talks about what we know now as the Four Noble Truths, and how to practice with them, or why we should practice with them. And it's implied here, so it's good to even if you have heard this sutta before, and many of you probably have if you've been coming to talks. Nonetheless, it's good to hear these things again and again, because you might hear something different. So he gives various teachings, and then he arrives at this part. He says, the noble path is that way that was awakened to by the Tathagata, or that's how he refers to himself, the one who comes in this way, the one who comes thus. And it gives rise to what? So he's telling you, as the Buddha often does, what the conclusion is before he's telling you what the actual way to the conclusion is. And that's fine. We know what it is that he's saying he's experienced. It gives rise to vision, to knowledge, to peace, direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. So people often ask what nibbana or nirvana is, besides having been a, grunge band? It's you could say that it is this absolute peace. And I gave an entire 6-month course on it, so we go into that in more length. But for now, to say that that is, those things are all pointing at, those are all pointers at absolute peace. And then he says this, and this is where he starts telling us about it. He says, now, there is the truth of dukkha. So dukkha is this Pali word. Sorry, excuse me, folks. This often happens to me in the fall, the allergies. This word dukkha. So dukkha is, for shorthand, sometimes translated as suffering. You may have heard this very often, right? That the Buddha is actually quoted as saying, I teach the end to suffering and only the end to suffering. But that word that's being translated as suffering is dukkha. And dukkha really has a much greater range of meaning than just what we mean by suffering in the English language. And he's going to give us a few examples here in the sutta in a moment. But I just want to say that well, let's look at the examples, and then I'll give you a little bit more of a taste for it, because it's important to have, I think, this more nuanced understanding of suffering if we're going to understand the path well. So he says, birth, aging, illness, death is all this thing called dukkha. Association with or being united with what's unpleasant is dukkha. Separation from what is pleasant is also dukkha. And this last one, not getting what one wants is dukkha. Right? A lot of people these days in the United States are suffering from that last dukkha, not getting what one wants. Huh? Or oftentimes you see kids, actually, kids teach us a lot about the dukkha of not getting what one wants. So it's not just, if you think about the way those examples, and he's just pulling out a handful of examples, right? But if you think about the character of those different examples, it has to do with this unfulfillment that we experience in life. That ultimately, even when you get something pleasant, eventually you must be separated from that thing. Whether in life or in death. Right? Or you have something unpleasant that you have to really be present for. You have no choice. Right? Like our pain in the body, for example. Everybody experiences some kind of discomfort in their body. That is the nature of it. And so the unsatisfactoriness or the unfulfilling part, in addition to the suffering, right? That sort of more deep. One time I was with a panel of Dharma teachers, and we were doing an article for one of the magazines, I forget which. And and I was asked to go first and to say what I thought dukkha was. And I said, to me, it's almost like there's this very deep kind of angst. You know what we mean by angst? This kind of deep unsettledness. Yeah. And that's the contrast with peace, right? So this is why I'm saying, if we start to understand these terms and we start to approach the practice in this way, we start to understand more clearly what it is, why this all fits together, right? So if the Buddha says, this is dukkha, and what I've awakened to is the end of dukkha, then what he has awakened to is ultimate peace, freedom from that sense of that angst, or that very subtle, even those most subtle layers of agitation and discomfort that we experience. And he says exactly how. And this is the interesting part, right? So he says, there is this fact, this truth, that there is suffering, or there is dukkha, there is unfulfillment. And then he says, there is the truth of the origin of dukkha. There is the truth, there is the knowledge that there is some reason for that, some cause for that. He doesn't actually give the cause in this sutta, that's a later sutta. But he states, yes, there is a cause, and there is a cessation of that cause. There is an ending of dukkha. And the way to the ending of dukkha is the Noble Eightfold Path, is the full practice. Not just one of them, mind you. Not just ethics, or just meditation, or just wisdom, or just non-duality, or just Dharma talks, or just retreats, but the whole path. And what he says very interestingly about this is he says that the fact of dukkha, the fact of this unsatisfactoriness, is to be understood. So this is called the three turnings. So with each one of the Four Noble Truths, there are three turnings. And the first part of it is this knowing of it. And then the second part of it is this actually implementing something about that knowing of it. And then the third part is the completion of that implementation, so to speak, right? When that actually opens up into kind of release. In fact, that's a phrase that we see very often in the suttas, this kind of ripening. It's called ripening in release, when the practice ripens in release. And so he says, yes, when he knew there is the truth of dukkha, then there arose in him vision, knowledge, wisdom, true knowledge, and light. Even before he's resolved it, right? This is just the knowing. And this is why the Buddha says it must be understood. Right? And then he goes on to say, and then, knowing that it must be fully understood, there arose in him a kind of knowledge, a kind of wisdom. Right? So the same thing is true for us, that each step on the way of knowing that there is dukkha and trying to understand that dukkha and seeing the release of that dukkha, because dukkha comes to an end. This is also true. It's not permanent. That's why it is the practice for us to look at it, to see it. Right? So acknowledging also the ending of dukkha and understanding the ending of dukkha and seeing that until it ripens in release. That also is our task. Yeah? And in between that, right? In between that first knowing that there is the thing and knowing that there is the end of the thing, there is this second noble truth, which is the causes, the origin. Right? What is it that is, what is the process that is at work here? What is the mechanism that is at work? So we study our own experience. We don't speculate about how this thing came to be. We study our actual experience about how this thing is now and how it is changing moment by moment, so that we can see for ourselves the truths of our lives. Not by making it up, not by some idea of it, but by seeing how this thing works. And by seeing how this thing works, then we are seeing, actually, what's universal about it as well. Because this thing works according to the principles that all things work, of being impermanent, of being unfulfilling, dukkha, of being conditional, impersonal, in a sense of being much greater than you. Those are said to be the three marks of what? Of all existence, not just us as human beings, including us as human beings, but all existence. So if you want to know about what's true about everything, if you want to know what's greater than you, if you want to know the principles that are at work, you start here. Because where do we exist except in the midst of those principles? And so we turn again and again and again and again and again to see that basic difficulty, and to see it in a way that makes it more clear and that helps us to understand how it works so that ultimately we can release ourselves from it. And that is a tall order, right? Looking at our own suffering, looking at our own difficulties, at the things that scare us or that agitate us or that make us uncomfortable is sometimes not so easy. And that's why we meditate, believe it or not. That's one of the many reasons why we meditate. Because we are learning that we can be present with those experiences, that we can actually observe that and be with it and know something about it. And that presence will actually help. That actually understanding and knowing something about it would actually help. So I'm going to give you an example from my own life, because I like to often try to do that, pull out some kind of a story that hopefully brings it into real life. So I was many years ago living at San Francisco Zen Center in the city there, at the city. So there are 3 campuses, and I was there in the city center. And so myself and this one other gentleman were the folks who had a key. We were called the residence reps, residence representatives, and we had a key to the building, so that like a master key, because each one of us might at some point lose our key to our room or get locked out of our room or locked out of the building, or maybe you lost your purse or whatever and you couldn't get in. And so there was somebody that you could call who would let you into your room or let you into the building at any hour of day or night. So it was a a way of being of service to the community. And so there were always 2 also, just in case somehow somebody didn't answer their phone or, whatever. And so it was myself and this other gentleman. And I really had a very hard time with him. This was somebody whose communication style was just so different from mine that we had a really hard time with each other. And when we were first appointed, we had to figure out, like, even where to put our phone numbers. So you're supposed to put your phone numbers in these spaces where all the residents can see them, so everybody can write it down and know who to contact, right, when they need help. And so it took some time, actually, to sit down with this man and negotiate, like talk about, where we were going to put it and whose phone number, because he was living in one building and I was living in another. And we both were taking care of folks in both buildings. But anyway, we had different ideas about how it should be done. And then finally we agreed, okay, we're going to put up both of our phone numbers in both buildings, because that makes it the most helpful for other folks. And I said, okay, I'll put it up. I'll post it on the bulletin board in my building where I live, and you post it on the bulletin board in the other building. Great. So we finally came to some understanding. And then next day I look at the bulletin board in the other building, still no phone numbers up. And another day goes by, still no phone numbers up. Another day goes by, and like that. And I'm wondering, what's going on? And every day that goes by, I'm getting more and more annoyed. Like, why did I even bother trying to have a conversation with this guy? I just, like, he's so untrustworthy. We had a deal, et cetera, and I'm getting really annoyed. So I say, okay, well, finally, I'm going to have to say something to him. So we're there in the hall, in his building, in the main building. And I see him in the hall, and I say, hey, oh, and then finally the numbers go up. Wait, before I see him in the hall, I'm going to get the story right. Before I see him in the hall, the number goes up on the bulletin board, and it's just his phone number. And then I'm really irritated, because we went through the whole conversation about how it was supposed to be both of our phone numbers, but it's actually only his that went up. in the building, on his building. So I see him in the hall and I'm like, hey, I saw that your phone number is up, only your phone number is up on the bulletin board. And before I could even say anything more, he says to me, oh, yeah, I forgot to do it, and so did it for me. And poof, my whole reality, right? My whole bubble is broken. Because I thought for sure that he had done it wrong, intentionally done it wrong, right? There's evidence on the bulletin board. It's just his phone number, right? But no, but it wasn't like that. And for whatever reason, in that moment, I was like, speechless. Because for whatever reason, in that moment, I saw so clearly how I had given myself all of this dukkha for days and created an entire situation in my mind that didn't exist. Right? Yes, he had forgotten and blah, blah, blah. I could have gone down that path. I could have just jumped right into that conversation, right? And been equally angry that it didn't work out the way that we said, and why didn't he get it done the first time? But no, but it wasn't about that, right? It was about a moment of seeing, yes, right. This difficulty that I'm feeling, this dukkha that I'm feeling, that's my job. Good job to me for giving myself a whole lot of dukkha. Thank you very much. Right? I can't pin that on him. Even though he didn't fulfill what we had said we were going to do. So that, as the Buddha says, understanding what's going on in this body and mind is what frees me or doesn't free me from dukkha. Not what's happening in the world, not saying my body should or shouldn't be like this, or my mind should or shouldn't be like this. In fact, that's his next discourse. He goes and he talks to the monks about that aspect of it. Maybe I'll talk about the second discourse next week. Oh no, not next week, because next week we're having the precepts after that, week after next. But anyway, I'm over my time. So I just wanted to say this, reiterate what the Buddha says. So just to finish with his words again, he says, just knowing there is the noble truth of dukkha, there arose in me vision and knowledge and wisdom and light. Just knowing that there is the truth of dukkha, and it is to be fully understood, there arose in me vision and knowledge and wisdom and light. And just knowing this noble truth of suffering, of dukkha, of unsatisfactoriness, of basic angst, has been fully understood, there arose in me vision and wisdom and knowledge and light. So there is great awakening, but there is also these beautiful individual moments of knowing, of insight, of freedom, all along the way. So I wish that for you each day, that you know your dukkha. Thank you. All right, so sadly I went on because this is this particular sutta is one of the I find really, really meaningful ones. But we have about 5 minutes if there are any comments or questions or reflections about that or about the meditation. Kylie says that would be a great topic for 2 weeks from now. Yes, the next part about the wanting it to be different. Okay, yes. So we'll do that. We'll do that topic. It's called Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. It's a topic on the, you could say, the marks or the attributes of non-self, or of conditionality. So that's a little bit more, sometimes a little bit more conceptual topic. So we'll try to bring it down home as usual.
So I'm just thinking of a lot of times we're so busy scrambling for more information, more, if only I read the right article or click on the right link, then I'll have the answer. And there never is an answer. There's nothing final there, right? But it keeps the mind so busy that we don't recognize the stress and the suffering in that, just that impulse to figure it all out, to define it all. And I mean, I certainly got caught up in that during the last dynasty, let's say, a few years back. And I finally had to just go, no, I don't want these people living in my nervous system. Just enough information to know what's going on. And beyond that, you're just asking for overwhelm, So anyway, just thought of that.
Yeah, thank you for the reflection there, Brad. Yes, that tendency is something I saw very, very commonly also in the hospital when I was a chaplain in the hospital, that is a way that people cope with fear or the unknown. And it brings to mind something that I want to be sure that is understood about this teaching, which is that you could say that our effort is to observe what is present and to observe it with as much clarity as we can bring to the situation. But the you could say the knowledge is already in it. Right? The knowledge is already in it. It's just a matter of us being able to receive it. So on that note, we are at the end of our time, and I just want to thank you all for coming out today, and thanks for the reflection there, Brad. And thanks to everyone who is supporting the Vihara in all the myriad ways, including your presence and financial and material supports that are happening and being of service. We are really all making this happen together. So may our wonderful practice, the merits of our practice, benefit all beings, that all beings might find absolute peace and wisdom in their hearts and minds, that all beings might know themselves as truths and find compassion for the suffering and difficulties that they encounter in their lives. And release, ultimate release, by the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts. May all beings be liberated.